Monsignor Michael Nazir-Ali, a former Church of England bishop, and now a Catholic priest, indeed, promoted by the Holy Father to Monsignor. Thank you very much for joining me. You must look at the clerics in your former church with deep sadness that such an important institution in England's public Christian life has so many clergy, has so defeatist.
Well, I think, first of all, Jacob, the survey that the Times has done, I'm not really convinced by it, to be quite honest. I don't know who's done it. The agency, the usual agencies are not named. The sample is very small. So they say they sampled 5,000 clergy, of which 1,400 responded, of which they have chosen under 1,200. That's 6% of the clergy. So majority opinions that they are reporting actually constitute about 3% of the clergy. Mm-hmm. So what do the rest think, I'm asking? It also depends on the questions they were asked and who was encouraged to respond. I mean, all of those things. So I'm not really convinced. But as you have said already, to the question, is this a Christian country? The answer cannot just be given by counting heads, even clergy heads, or even episcopal heads, if you want. This has to do with those very deep things in the culture and in our constitution that continue to be irreducibly Christian. You mentioned the coronation, we might mention the Queen's funeral.
Yes.
I mean, that reached billions of people in the world, and it was a profoundly Christian occasion. You mentioned Alfred, but we could talk about Magna Carta, the very basis of our freedoms.
Well, I couldn't make my monologue too long. It was in an earlier draft. That,
well, no, you had to leave something for me to say.
And you're absolutely right. The first part of Magna Carta says the Church in England shall be free, and it is underpinning Thomas Becket's martyrdom against Henry II in favour of an independent church.
Well, that's right. So the very basis of law, of the constitutional monarchy itself, is a product of the Judeo-Christian tradition and of the teaching of the Bible. But then also this idea of the human person. You mentioned Tom Holland. I might mention Larry Siedentop, an Oxford academic, who has actually shown that the whole idea of personhood, as we value it in our liberal society, has very deep Christian roots. Now, he is not himself a Christian, but he has identified this.
And it's one of the most interesting things about Tom Holland's book is that the teaching of Christianity in the Roman world was deeply shocking, that they thought that if you were unfortunate, that was it. You didn't deserve anything from anybody else. And Christians came along and said, no, every soul is valued by God. But this was a revelation, a deeply shocking and surprising view.
You see, all the rights belonged to the heads of the households and all the duties to everyone else. Christianity replaced this by the idea of the equality of persons, developed throughout the centuries by canon law, by the way, particularly in relation to marriage, for instance, and the position of women, how that was improved by canon law provision for marriage. So, cruelty for pleasure, female infanticide, easy divorce, no role for women in the public. I mean, all of this was replaced.
Absolutely. Well, one of the earliest things the Christians do is rescue babies who have been exposed in ancient Rome because the head of the household, I think, had a fortnight to decide whether or not to keep the baby or to expose it. And as you say, Christians recognising the dignity of the individual were appalled by that and eventually stopped it.
Yeah, I mean, the reason people were so shocked by the Lucy Letby case was precisely because of the Christian formation still of people's minds and hearts.
And that's what I'm trying to argue, is that although not so many people go to church as used to, actually the structures of our society are still fundamentally Christian, enormously to the benefit of society.
Yes, and when you come to things like funerals, grief, consolation, celebration, then those nodal points in human lives, then the Christian expression is the one that people turn to.
So what, if we accept this report, and I note your qualifications, which are obviously important, but if we accept it, what would you be saying to your former bishops in the Church of England? How do they get back some determination, some backbone, really, to stand up for what they believe in the success of Christianity, to be proud of it, rather than, if you boast in anything, as St. Paul says, boast in the Lord? That doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, certitude, I think, is the point, that, as St. Paul said, if the trumpet gives an uncertain sound, then no one's going to follow. So I think if we are clear about the faith that we have inherited from the apostles and from Christ himself, then people will see the reason for it. They will see it not only in church, but in human living, in the family, for instance, and why the family is ordered in the way that it is, in a just society, in valuing life from the very beginning to the very end. I mean, all of those things. So Christian faith and Christian values are necessary for living in all sorts of ways, even in legislation. I mean, you're a legislator, but don't want to teach grandma how to suck eggs. But you know how often in legislation questions arise which can only be settled by an appeal to the Christian tradition. I mean, take just war, the justification
indeed.
of conflict.
That is going to be another conversation about Thomas Aquinas, who is one of my great heroes. But thank you very much, Monsignor. Don't forget to let me know what you think, mailmog@gbnews.com.